The Java Sea glittered like hammered copper in the late afternoon sun when we first spotted the unusual disturbance in the water. 3 miles to starboard, a patch of ocean churned without wind to explain it. Captain Hargrove lowered his spyglass and made note in the ship's log, standard procedure for any navigational anomaly. We were 5 days out from Singapore, aboard the merchant vessel Octavia, bound for Darwin with a cargo of machine parts, textiles, and 12 barrels of whale oil. The year was 1872, and none of us would reach our destination as the men we had embarked. I served as the ship's clerk, responsible for maintaining inventory and correspondence for the captain. That evening, I recorded the coordinates, the weather conditions, and the strange way the ocean had boiled without apparent cause. I could not have known then that I was documenting the beginning of our undoing. When I close my eyes these many years later, I still see the ink spreading across the page, marking the last ordinary day of my life. So before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The Octavia carried 23 souls. Captain Nathaniel Hargrove commanded with the quiet authority of a man who had crossed the equator 37 times. First, Mate Collins stood as his right hand, a weathered Scotsman who spoke little but observed everything. Our navigator, Edmund Walsh, had sailed these waters for 2 decades and claimed to know every current from Ceylon to the Solomon Islands. Among the regular crew were men from England, America, Norway, and the Philippines. We were not explorers or scientists, merely merchants following established trade routes through well-charted waters. We believed ourselves to be in the company of the known world. Dr. Fletcher served as ship's physician. He had joined us in Singapore, replacing our previous doctor who had succumbed to fever. Fletcher was a naturalist by training, more interested in collecting specimens than treating sailors' ailments, but competent enough with common illnesses. He maintained meticulous journals of marine life observed during our voyage, drawings of flying fish, notes on dolphin behavior, samples of unusual seaweed preserved between sheets of waxed paper. His scientific methodology would later prove inadequate. The day after we observed the disturbance, Seaman Thao, one of our Filipino crewmen, reported that the seabirds that had been following our vessel since Singapore had vanished. Not gradually diminished, but disappeared completely overnight. I noted this in my records as a curiosity. Captain Hargrove dismissed it as coincidence. Walsh, our navigator, grew silent when informed, his eyes scanning the horizon with unusual intensity. "Water's getting deeper here," was all he said. That night, I awoke to an unusual silence. At sea, silence is never complete. There's always the creaking of timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, the whisper of wind through rigging. But in those pre-dawn hours, the Octavia moved through water that seemed to swallow sound. I dressed and made my way to the deck, where I found Walsh already standing at the rail, pipe unlit in his hand. "Something's following us," he said without turning. "I see nothing," I replied, scanning the moonlit waters. "Not seeing. Feeling." He tapped his chest. "Old sailors know." I did not record this conversation in my official reports. Some things exist between men at sea that do not belong on paper, but I remember every word, and the way the navigator's fingers trembled as he finally lit his pipe, the match flaring unnaturally bright in the dense darkness surrounding our vessel. The next day passed without incident. The sea remained unnaturally calm, our progress slowed by lack of wind. The air hung heavy with humidity. Men moved sluggishly about their duties, skins slick with sweat that would not evaporate in the thick air. Captain Hargrove ordered additional rations of lime juice to ward off lethargy. Dr. Fletcher spent hours at the stern, dropping specimen jars into the water and examining the contents with growing puzzlement. "Nothing," he muttered when I inquired about his findings. "Not a single microorganism. Water's dead." That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, First Mate Collins ordered the depth sounded, standard procedure when navigating unfamiliar waters, though our charts showed we were crossing a well-known shipping lane with ample clearance beneath our keel. The leadsman called out the measurement. "No bottom, sir!" The heavy lead weight had descended the full length of our longest line without striking ground. This was unexpected. Our charts indicated the depth should have been no more than 200 fathoms in this area. Collins ordered a second sounding with the same result. Captain Hargrove examined the charts carefully. rechecking our position against Walsh's navigational calculations. Everything indicated we were where we were supposed to be. The captain made a notation in the log, attributing the discrepancy to an uncharted trench or possible error in the existing depth records. I remember watching his pen move across the page, the way it hesitated before completing the entry. Captain Hargrove was not a man given to uncertainty, but something in his eyes that evening suggested he was writing what should be true rather than what he believed. That night, the dreams began. I will not detail them here, except to say that they involved vast shapes moving in darkness and the sensation of being observed by something ancient and patient. I was not alone in my disturbed sleep. At breakfast, men spoke in low voices about nightmares, though the content varied. Some dreamed of drowning, others of being pulled into endless depths. Young Harris, the cabin boy, refused to eat, his face pale and eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. Walsh ate nothing, watching the horizon with increasing agitation. "We should alter course," he said quietly to the captain, "west by northwest." "That would add 3 days to our journey," Hargrove replied. "The company expects timely delivery." "The company isn't here," Walsh said, but did not press further. By midday, the air had become oppressive. Though no clouds darkened the sky, the sunlight seemed to dim, as if filtered through murky water. The sea's surface took on an unusual viscosity, the wake behind our vessel closing more quickly than it should. Dr. Fletcher collected samples in glass vials, examining the water with mounting scientific interest. "The salinity is wrong," he announced that afternoon. "And there's something else, a substance I can't identify, organic in nature, but unlike any secretion I've encountered." "Could it be whale spermaceti?" I suggested, thinking of our cargo. "No, this is something else entirely. It appears to be some form of mucus." The word hung in the air between us. Men exchanged glances, but said nothing. Captain Hargrove ordered the cargo inspected to ensure no leakage from our barrels had contaminated the surrounding waters, though we all knew 12 barrels of whale oil could not affect the ocean across miles of our journey. That evening, as darkness fell, Seaman Rodriguez spotted the first lights, small bluish-green phosphorescent spots that appeared to pace our vessel at a distance of approximately half a mile. Captain Hargrove observed them through his spyglass but could offer no explanation. They maintained a consistent pattern, never approaching closer, never falling behind, moving precisely at our speed, regardless of changes in our own momentum. "Bioluminescent organisms," Dr. Fletcher suggested. "Perhaps a new species drawn to our hull." "They're too organized," Collins countered. "Look at the pattern. They're maintaining formation." I recorded both observations in my log without comment. The lights continued throughout the night, visible from any point along the rails. Men began to avoid watching them directly, finding that prolonged observation produced a curious vertigo. The following morning, we discovered the first physical evidence that something was wrong. During routine maintenance, 2 crewmen found unusual markings along the waterline of our hull, a series of perfectly circular indentations approximately 4 inches in diameter, spaced at regular intervals. The wood within these depressions appeared chemically altered, softened as if exposed to a powerful acid. Dr. Fletcher collected samples of the affected wood, his scientific enthusiasm temporarily overcoming the growing unease that had settled over the ship. "Remarkable," he said, examining the specimens under his portable microscope. "The cellular structure has been completely broken down, some kind of digestive enzyme, perhaps." Captain Hargrove ordered additional watches posted, with men stationed at all sides of the vessel to report any unusual sightings. Walsh, our navigator, had grown increasingly withdrawn, spending hours consulting his charts and making calculations that seemed to distress him further. "The currents are wrong," he finally admitted to the captain that afternoon. "We're being pulled southward despite all appearances." Hargrove verified this himself, confirming that our actual position no longer matched our expected coordinates based on speed and heading. We had drifted nearly 15 nautical miles off course without any detectable shift in wind or visible current. That night, Seaman Harris disappeared. The cabin boy had been on watch at the forward rail. His absence was discovered at the changing of the watch, his post abandoned, no sign of struggle, no cry heard by any of the crew. His lantern remained on the rail, still lit, the glass warm to the touch. Captain Hargrove ordered an immediate search of the entire vessel, but the boy was simply gone, as completely as if he had never existed. The rational explanation was that he had fallen overboard, perhaps dozed at his post and slipped into the sea. But no one believed this, not even the captain, who nevertheless recorded it as the official account in his log. We all knew the truth. Something had taken Harris and done so with such precision and silence that not even the men standing watch 30 feet away had noticed. The phosphorescent lights returned that night, more numerous and closer to our vessel. Through the spyglass, they no longer appeared as simple points of light, but as raised structures, luminous nodules attached to larger, shadowed forms that remained just below the surface. They surrounded us now on all sides, maintaining a distance of perhaps 200 yards. No one slept. Men clustered on deck, weapons drawn, watching the lights circle our ship. Captain Hargrove maintained his composure, ordering regular depth soundings and position checks throughout the night. Each sounding came back the same. No bottom found. Each position check showed us drifting further from our planned route, though our compass indicated we maintained our heading. Walsh no longer consulted his charts. "They're useless now," he said. "We're being herded." With the first light of dawn, the phosphorescent lights vanished, but the sea around us had changed. The water had darkened to a deep indigo, almost black in the troughs between waves. The surface carried an oily sheen that caught the morning light in unnatural patterns, refracting it in ways that hurt the eyes to observe directly. Dr. Fletcher lowered a specimen jar into this strange water. When he retrieved it, the glass had clouded, etched by something in the liquid. The water inside the jar moved independently of the ship's motion, swirling in slow, deliberate patterns before finally growing still. "This is no natural phenomenon," Fletcher admitted, his scientific certainty finally shaken. "There is intention here." By midday, the Octavia had slowed to a crawl despite moderate winds filling our sails. The ship moved as if dragging through molasses, our wake closing almost immediately behind us. Captain Hargrove ordered men to observe the hull from the longboat, suspecting we had become entangled in unseen debris. The men reported nothing visibly attached to our hull, but described the water around the ship as wrong and too thick. They returned to the Octavia visibly shaken, refusing to elaborate further. One man, Seaman Parker, had trailed his hand in the water during their inspection. By evening, his flesh had begun to blister and slough away, the bones of his fingers visible through dissolving tissue. Dr. Fletcher administered morphine, but could do nothing to stop the progression of what appeared to be an extraordinarily aggressive form of tissue dissolution. Parker died shortly after midnight, his body convulsing in the final stages. Captain Hargrove, against all maritime tradition, ordered the corpse sealed in a weighted crate rather than committed to the sea. None of us objected to this breach of custom. None of us wanted to return Parker to whatever waited below. The following morning, we awoke to find the Octavia completely becalmed. The sky remained clear, but the light had changed, filtered through what appeared to be a thin mist that had no detectable source. The air carried a faint metallic odor, similar to the smell of blood, but somehow older, more primitive. The sea around us had changed again. The surface tension appeared increased, the water mounding slightly around our hull instead of flowing naturally against it. Captain Hargrove ordered all hands to stations, though there was little for anyone to do in the absence of wind. At approximately 10 o'clock, Walsh spotted the first appendage. It rose from the water about 50 yards from our starboard bow, a sinuous limb the color of bleached bone, but with the texture of something raw and unformed. It extended perhaps 20 feet above the surface before curving back into the depths, its movement deliberate and controlled. No one spoke as we watched it rise and descend. No one needed to name what we were seeing. Dr. Fletcher, his scientific training reasserting itself even in the face of the impossible, began to sketch the appendage in his journal, making notes about its apparent structure and movement patterns. "Cephalopodic in nature," he muttered, "but the size is beyond any known species." Within the hour, 2 more limbs appeared, one off the port bow, another near the stern. They maintained their distance, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed coordinated, as if taking measurements or testing responses. Captain Hargrove ordered the ship's 2 small cannons loaded, though no one believed they would provide meaningful defense. The day passed in this manner. The the pale appendages rising and falling around our vessel, never approaching closer than 50 yards, but never retreating. By dusk, we had counted 8 distinct limbs. They had surrounded us completely. "It's measuring the ship," Walsh said quietly as we watched from the quarterdeck, "learning its dimensions." That night, no one left their post. Men stood watch with loaded muskets, though not a single shot was fired. The phosphorescent lights had returned, now clearly visible as organs attached to the massive appendages that continued their slow, rhythmic rising and falling around our vessel. In the eerie blue-green glow, we could now discern suction discs along the underside of each limb. Not the small suckers of common squid, but massive concave structures large enough to engulf a man's head. Shortly after midnight, the attack began. The first appendage struck the forward mast with tremendous force, wrapping around the timber and constricting. The wood groaned, but held. A second limb curled around the bow, acid secretions immediately beginning to smoke against the oak planking. Men fired at the massive tentacles, but the balls seemed to pass through the pale flesh without causing significant damage. Captain Hargrove ordered the cannons fired. The flash and roar momentarily drove back the appendages, but they returned within minutes, more aggressive in their approach. One limb swept across the deck, seizing Seaman Williams and lifting him screaming into the air. We watched in horror as he was passed from tentacle to tentacle, moved steadily away from the ship toward the center of the surrounding ring of appendages. I will not describe what happened to Williams. I will say only that his screams ended abruptly and that the surface of the water briefly churned with activity before growing still again. The attack continued through the night. 3 more men were taken. The mainmast was damaged beyond repair, listing dangerously to port. The hull had been breached below the waterline in 2 locations, requiring constant pumping to keep the vessel afloat. By dawn, the Octavia was no longer seaworthy, but remained inexplicably buoyant, as if deliberately kept from sinking. As the first light broke the horizon, we saw it clearly for the first time, not the appendages which had been visible through the night, but the central mass from which they extended. It rose slowly from the depths, a vast dome breaking the surface approximately 100 yards from our vessel. In the strengthening light, we could see that it was not pale like the tentacles, but a deep mottled red-black, with a texture similar to scar tissue. Across its surface, structures like eyes opened and closed in patterns that suggested not random movement, but communication, a visual language of pupil contractions and iris dilations. Dr. Fletcher, despite everything, continued to document what we were witnessing. "Not a squid," he murmured, sketching frantically. "Not a known cephalopod at all. The morphology is wrong. This is something else, something older." As the creature's central mass rose further, we could see that what we had thought were 8 tentacles were merely the primary appendages. Scores of smaller limbs now became visible, extending from the central body in all directions, some no thicker than a man's arm, others massive enough to crush our longboat. The creature's full size became apparent. The central body alone easily matched the Octavia in length, with the extended reach of its appendages, creating a killing field hundreds of yards in diameter. Captain Hargrove, his face gray but composed, gave the order to abandon ship. Our vessel was lost, our only hope to reach the small atoll visible on the horizon, perhaps 5 miles distant. We lowered the remaining longboat, loaded with what supplies could be salvaged, and the 10 surviving crew members. As we pulled away from the Octavia, the creature made no immediate move to stop us. Its massive appendages continued to explore the dying ship, methodically dismantling it piece by piece. We rowed with the desperate energy of men who know death follows close behind. We had covered perhaps half a mile when 3 of the smaller appendages detached from the main body and began moving through the water toward us with terrible purpose. Captain Hargrove ordered us to row faster, though we were already at the limits of human endurance. Dr. Fletcher, who had brought his specimen case and journals, now threw them overboard to lighten our craft. The tentacles gained on us steadily. When they were less than 50 yards behind, Walsh stood suddenly, the ship's axe in his hands. "Keep rowing," he said calmly. "I'll buy you distance." Before anyone could stop him, he had leapt from the boat into the water. We saw him swing the axe as the first tentacle reached him, the blade biting deep into the pale flesh. Ichor spurted from the wound, not blood as we know it, but a thick, cloudy fluid that steamed upon contact with air. The tentacle recoiled momentarily. Walsh managed 2 more strikes before the appendages overwhelmed him. The last I saw of our navigator, he was being lifted into the air, still swinging the axe with diminishing strength as multiple smaller tentacles enveloped his body. His sacrifice gave us the time needed. The wounded appendage retreated to the main body, the others following. We reached the atoll as the sun reached its zenith, dragging our boat onto the narrow beach and collapsing in exhaustion. From the highest point of the small island, we watched the Octavia's final destruction. The creature methodically disassembled our vessel, piece by piece, examining each component before allowing it to sink. The process continued until nightfall, by which time nothing remained of the ship but floating debris. That night, the phosphorescent lights surrounded our atoll, maintaining a consistent distance of approximately 100 yards from shore. They remained until dawn, then retreated to deeper water. We survived on that barren outcropping for 17 days before being spotted by the Australian vessel Southern Cross. During that time, the lights returned each night, their presence a constant reminder that the creature remained. It never approached the island, never tested the shallows surrounding our refuge. Whether this represented a physical limitation or simply a lack of interest in pursuing us further, I cannot say. Of the 23 men who sailed from Singapore aboard the Octavia, only 7 returned to tell what happened. Captain Hargrove submitted his official report to the shipping company, describing our vessel's loss due to an unexpected storm and structural failure. The Admiralty accepted this account without question. What ship's master would claim his vessel was destroyed by a creature from marine mythology? But in private, Hargrove documented everything. His personal log, which he entrusted to me before his death 3 years later, contains the full account, along with Dr. Fletcher's sketches and the navigational calculations that show our unnatural drift. I have maintained this document, adding my own recollections and those of the other survivors as they were shared with me over the years. 4 decades have passed since we encountered the creature in the Java Sea. I alone remain of the 7 who reached that atoll. Captain Hargrove died of pneumonia in 1875. Dr. Fletcher continued his scientific career but avoided maritime research, focusing instead on botanical studies until his death in 1891. The others, Tompkins, Rodriguez, Collins, and Bennett, have all preceded me into whatever waits beyond this life. I have spent these intervening years researching similar accounts, ships lost under unusual circumstances, reports of massive unidentified marine creatures, patterns of disappearances along specific oceanic routes. The evidence suggests the creature we encountered was not unique, nor was our experience isolated. There are others of its kind in the deep places of our world. Modern steamships cross those waters now, their steel hulls and powerful engines giving their crews a confidence we could not possess in our wooden sailing vessel. They follow regular routes, maintain wireless communication, carry sophisticated navigational equipment. They believe themselves masters of the sea. They are mistaken. I review the shipping news each morning with particular attention to vessels reported overdue or lost. When one disappears in certain waters, I make note of the coordinates and add them to my charts. Patterns emerge. The creatures are territorial, patient, and methodical in their hunting. The official reports cite storms, navigational errors, mechanical failures. The companies accept these explanations, as does the public. It is more comfortable than the alternative, that our human presumption of dominion over the oceans is a temporary illusion, tolerated by entities that existed before our species evolved and will remain long after we have gone. I no longer sleep well when it rains. The sound of water against glass reminds me too much of that night, the soft, deliberate tapping of acidic suckers testing the hull of the Octavia, measuring its strength, assessing its vulnerabilities. I keep my charts and records in a sealed trunk, to be opened only after my death. There is no purpose in sharing them now. No one would believe, and even if they did, what could be done? The oceans belong to them. We are merely visitors, permitted to cross the surface as long as we do not attract undue attention. Sometimes, in dreams that are not entirely dreams, I see the phosphorescent lights again. They pace my thoughts as they once paced our vessel, patient and observant. In these moments between sleeping and waking, I understand a truth that my conscious mind refuses to accept, that the creature recognized me as I recognized it, that somehow, across the decades and miles, it remembers me still and waits.